Okay, so our next speaker is Lex Fridman. Lex is a postdoc at MIT, and from my time in academia, I know that postdocs don't get a lot of respect. Uh, but he gets all our respect, and he will give us a very interesting presentation about things he's doing and actually working with our members in Massachusetts. So thanks, Lex.
Yeah, I'm definitely put in the unenviable position of, especially for a computer science nerd, to follow an incredible presentation. So, and it's also been humbling to meet so many passionate Tesla owners and enthusiasts here today, and TMC in general. And people are excited about Tesla as an electric vehicle, but people are also more broadly excited about Tesla as a company that is aggressively pushing innovation in an industry that has historically not been known for that. And that is what is exciting to us, to me, and Autopilot and automation broadly is at the core of that innovation outside of the electric vehicle component. And so let me bring down, I'll try to end with smiles, but let me let me bring down the energy and also the passion, because my role at MIT as a researcher engineer is to be dispassionate and objective, and bringing big, huge data, quantitative numbers behind the human at the center of automation, defending and ensuring that automation, like Autopilot, has a successful future in both in providing an enjoyable driving experience and, as George said, a safe one, because that is everybody's eyes in terms of automation are on Autopilot now. Policymakers, the public, scientists, and it's so important to not rely on poorly filmed YouTube videos as the main source of information. We want to put some big data behind this and some real science behind what automation is. So quickly, there is every organization has different definitions of automation. There's levels from 0 to 4 or 5, and broadly speaking, 0 means it's a fully manually controlled car. 4 or 5 means the car is driving by itself with no steering wheel. And Autopilot, depending on how you define it, falls somewhere between 2 and 3. But we're interested at the Advanced Vehicle Technology program at MIT in looking at every flavor of automation, everything from automatic emergency braking that just comes in every once in a while, hopefully very rarely, to warning systems, to longitudinal lateral control systems that just help you out if you drift out of lane, to these amazing, more fully autonomous systems like auto steer and TAC, adaptive cruise control, that Tesla provides, and further systems that require some planning, so changing lanes and automatic parking. So to put this into context, this is the data side. This is what we're looking at. As you know, there's, as Tesla reported, there's 130 million miles driven since September, October last year that Autopilot was released. 130 million miles on Autopilot. And there's 3 trillion miles driven every year on United States roads in manually controlled vehicles. So one of the big things in terms of safety is these numbers, fatalities. And tragically, there's been a first fatality with Autopilot. But every year there's 32,000 fatalities in manually controlled vehicles. And the challenge here is that we understand the first one, the manually controlled vehicles. There's been decades of research, excellent human side, human factors research and understanding what are the sources of these fatalities. There's the director of NHTSA came out and there's these 4Ds, drowsy, distracted, drunk, drugged driving, and there's a lot of different studies in universities and companies looking at different sources of that, of those fatalities and risk and dangers. There is not much data behind automated driving, and this is what we're doing. We're collecting large, real-world, naturalistic data in Tesla and other cars that are stepping up to the challenge of putting real automation on the road. And more than that, we have to process that big data into actual behavioral knowledge using computer vision and machine learning. And I'll briefly describe what that involves. The questions we want to answer. First, because this is such a new and cutting-edge world in terms of automation, we may not even know the questions we want to answer. Part of the problem is we want to collect the data to even know the questions. But broadly speaking, we want to see how driver behavior changes short-term and long-term with automation. How does attention change? Drowsiness. How does alertness change? How does trust in the system change over time as reflected by usage patterns? How does, in the case of autopilot, when control is given back to you to drive, over time, do you become a worse driver or a better driver? And general commuting patterns. All of this requires something that Tesla is currently not doing, is video of the driver. And that is at the core. So we're collecting all the kind of data that Tesla is collecting and analyzing, but we're also adding multiple cameras on the driver to understand the human side of automation. And so we're running a study where Tesla owners like yourself are allowing us to install cameras all over the car and recording driver behavior over 1+ years. Some interesting, so we're scaling very slowly to make sure everything works, but are looking to increase significantly very quickly once this stabilizes. We started in January. We have currently 9 vehicles. So let me zoom in maybe on 2 interesting ones. We've just instrumented a Model X, and this is a 25-year-old individual who has never owned a vehicle before, and he's never driven a vehicle for prolonged periods of times before. And this is equipped with Autopilot. So we get to understand what is this experience of this person like as they learn to use Autopilot. And the other very interesting subject one is actually a speaker here today, and he drove all the way from Boston to be with us, and he's been an amazing person, Rob. So thank you very much to him. What are we trying to detect? So there's cameras looking at the driver's face. There's cameras looking at the body, hands, feet. And we're detecting from the face where the driver is looking. So this is called gaze. This is one of the critical things to measure alertness, attention, so on. We're also detecting, as I'll briefly mention, emotion. So emotional state, frustration. And a big one that's very difficult is drowsiness. From what's called the dash video, this is the video camera that captures the hands and the body. We look at hands on the wheel. When your autopilot is engaged, what are you doing with your hands in terms of smartphone activity, other objects? Activity. So what are you doing? There's a lot of sort of YouTube videos with a lot of clips, a lot of views that show some ridiculous activity going on. We want to, these are just fun, but they're not real, and they're not reflective of real driver experience. and they provide a wrong feeling of safety implications of this automation. And from the instrument cluster, as you'll see, we have a video of the instrument cluster, and we're parsing everything about the vehicle state. So Autopilot and all the other things that the instrument cluster is providing to the driver, we're extracting all of that. And the forward video, for those of you that may be familiar, this is the video that Tesla has as well, is we're doing all the classic robotics things of SLAM, which is a fancy word for figuring out where you are, localization, then detecting all the things like pedestrians, vehicles, lanes, traffic signs, weather conditions, and so on. And of course, that's all in support of supported by other sensors like audio, GPS, IMU. And we're using computer vision to process all of that data and extract real behavioral knowledge. So here, sped up really quick, try not to focus on it, but it's a case study, like a road trip to Florida, and one of the people in our study, right? So a large part of this is welcome to Boston weather. Well, it skipped over it, but there's horrible rainstorms and so on. So even though Autopilot was available, the driver chose not to engage it. And so what's being shown here on the bottom left is automated detection of whether Autopilot is on and off, or more clearly, auto steer is on or off. And what's showing on the bottom right is the total number of driving hours, total number that the Autopilot is available, and the total number of hours and minutes that Autopilot was engaged. And so here is this is the kind of data that we're working with. We're able to extract all these periods of time when Autopilot is enabled and able to study behavior across those stretches of time. A bunch of parts to this, right? So first, the sensors. We want to scale, 100 plus vehicles. So the sensors have to be inexpensive. So the Logitech C920, custom case. We can put any lens on it. It has onboard compression, which means you're talking about hundreds of thousands of hours of data. If you're familiar with this kind of thing, it's very difficult. It explodes quickly. So the kind of thing that YouTube is doing and collecting all that video is incredibly difficult. So we have to do that in our program. So then there's the algorithms. In the interest of time, it looks like I won't bore you with the details here, but let me just say, if you know, machine learning has been revolutionized in the past 4, 5, 6 years with the advent of deep learning, which, even though neural networks is a thing that's been around since the 60s, there's been a few breakthroughs that made it very effective for images. So you're able to recognize when there's a picture of a leopard, you can very accurately recognize it's a leopard. When there's a picture of a person on a horse, you can not only recognize the fact that it's a person on a horse, you can segment the image in detecting different parts. Things that we take for granted as human beings we can do easily is actually very challenging. There's a heat map for a tabby cat. Heat map can accurately detect where the cat is located in the image. Again, detecting exactly the location of the object. So those are the algorithms. Then there is also, to make those algorithms work, you have to run over hundreds of terabytes of data that a human being could never be able to annotate manually. So you have to teach the system of the kind of case study with the Tesla, with the white truck. Those situations all have to be taught to the system to understand. And so you have to allow the system to do 99.999% of the work, but every once in a while, when it's confused, it has to go to the human being for help. And lastly, there's a little comic of a boss saying, let's solve this problem by using the big data none of us have the slightest idea what to do with. So this is a popular, big data is this word that has been used, the term that's been used a lot. So collecting data is easy. Tesla is doing an incredible job of collecting the data. The big question is, what are you doing with that data? Because the compute part is the really hard part. We have 4,000 CPUs, over 800 GPUs, which if you're familiar with, that's what's required for deep learning, and a personalized fast link to MIT. Let's look at some videos. So first is cleaning the data and synchronizing the data. So we have all of these sensors going, all these video cameras, audio, everything from the CAN network of the car, IMU sensors. So all of that, there's thousands of data streams. They have to be perfectly synchronized, right? So we have real-time clocks to synchronize everything. If you want to understand behavior across different sensors, they better be synchronized to under millisecond accuracy, especially when you're concerned about safety critical events. So beyond that, there's a visual, so this is some cameras being shown, and visualization of optical flow that measures vibration in all the sensors, and those vibrations are used to validate that the data is synchronized. Okay, so it's clean and synchronized. Then let me show you some of the things we're detecting. So driver gaze, as I mentioned, is the where are you looking question. When you're sitting in a laboratory with perfect lighting, it's a very easy question. But getting to 100% accuracy in the real world across different types of faces, across different types of makeup and sunglasses and gender, race, all of these things, and getting it right is very difficult. So driver gaze classification is the task of breaking it down into in the driving context, the different regions you look at. On road, instrument cluster, left, right. So you extract some points in the face. There's a lot of fun stuff, fun challenges there. Okay, so here's in the Tesla, the same thing. Being shown in the middle top is the face being creepily extracted, so this is not one of the people in our study. This is one of the fellow researchers. We almost never show data of subjects unless they encourage us to, and most of us never get to watch this data. It's automatically processed and extracted. So here, being shown two things being detected: the state of the autopilot in the bottom right. There's an icon being detected, and in the top middle is where you're looking on the road. And this allows us to study. So here coming up is a large curb that really you shouldn't be using autopilot at all. And the driver doesn't have, feels that the autopilot gets a little too close to the curb and chooses to take over. These kind of takeover situations is over tens of thousands of those situations is what we want to look at. Okay, so here's another. This is one of the people in our study who encouraged us to show. To show, he's a huge Tesla supporter. So this is on that trip to Florida, and again, being detected in the top left is the autopilot state, and there's the kind of fumbling with the navigation system that all of us have probably done. All of this is done while autopilot is still enabled, but what you see is that even though autopilot is enabled, you're still behaving as if you're controlling the car, so you're still paying attention to the road, you're still glancing back to make sure that everything is safe. Emotion, for those folks who have done any kind of work with effective computing, that's what it's called, or have felt emotion, have know that it's actually a really complex thing to even understand. So we're not interested in broadly sort of an in-car psychiatrist or something, but we're interested in specific interactions with navigation system. So there's frustration when you're, and I'm sure many of you have felt frustration with a navigation system, or frustration with autopilot, or frustration specifically with a leading vehicle. So in these focus situations, we have self-reported annotated data sets which allow us to detect specifically the kind of facial features and audio features when you do speak that are strongly correlated with frustration. So then we can pull out all the periods of time across thousands of miles when you're frustrated and ask why, especially as it relates to automation. And what you find here is this little clip is actually smiling funny enough, is one of the strongest indications in the driving context of frustration. Because if you think about it, so driving is a really fundamentally boring task. So a satisfied, happy person looks bored. And a frustrated person is almost laughing at the absurdity of the world that would allow this kind of situation to happen, that kind of. So, and then quickly to sort of, there's much better researched questions of external detection, detecting traffic lights, pedestrians. There is, I'm trying to skip here, but vehicle, there we go, vehicle detection, cyclist detection, pedestrian detection. All these things I mentioned with the deep nets. There's quickly growing data sets which allow us to be done very accurately. And in fact, the technology that Tesla is using to do the actual autopilot is using some of the same algorithms. But those are important for us in understanding human behavior because we want to know the context of autopilot use, the context of gaze and frustration and attention, alertness, drowsiness, all of those things. So we want to know everything that's going on in the external world as well. Another example, weather conditions really important for us, road type and surface and the number of, it goes down to the number of cracks in the road. So, and the wetness of the surface even though it's not raining. So in this case, we're using video and audio. It's actually playing the audio, cool. You don't have to, but it's the audio of the tire interaction with the road that we're using to detect whether the road is dry and wet. So all of these problems, have to be solved in order to create a large view of the driving experience in order to understand the impact on the human. So SLAM localizing exactly where you are in the external environment relative to other vehicles and relative to lane positions. So really to zoom in, so the whole purpose of this is to be able to, without human involvement, to be able to pull out thousands, tens of thousands, millions of epochs of interaction with autopilot, with automation, and other safety technologies in order to understand why we use it, how we use it, and to ensure that autopilot and a lot of the exciting stuff that Tesla is doing is successfully adopted and creates a safe driving experience. So we're always looking for support, collaboration, ideas, definitely, especially from Tesla owners here and TMC broadly, opinions, and people to join the study. You can always email me or just grab me here at friedman@mit.edu. And I have to use this opportunity shamelessly to say, maybe this is the end with a smile part. If anyone still has a +1 to the Gigafactory, so if there's any questions.
So just one quick question. Are you controlling for the differences that you might have with the drivers knowing that the car is instrumented and the cameras are everywhere?
Yeah, it's called very technically the no-speak factor, which is the time it takes for you to forget that you're being watched. And sadly enough for us, not for us, for us as human beings, is it takes less than a minute in most cases.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, you're analyzing human behavior on the part of the driver. I wondered if you'd done any analyzing of the behavior of the cars out on the road. Just thinking as a driver, I tend to classify drivers. This is somebody who weaves in and out. This is somebody who waits till the last minute to stop. And those kind of classifications of the other drivers help me be a better driver.
Of the other drivers in the scene.
On the road, yeah.
Yeah. So this, again, very technical term. We have an a-hole detector. This is Boston. So Boston drivers are famous for this, but this is a huge impact on your own safety. Definitely, we are analyzing that in this study.
On the deep neural nets that are used for things like SLAM, certainly you may know about yours. I don't know if you know Tesla's. Mm-hmm. Do you take just the straight pixel data to the deep neural net, or is there some pre-processing done, edge detection and such?
Yeah. So deep nets, there's no the goal is, at least in most cases, to do no pre-processing, no kind of feature extraction, no clevers. That Tesla's doing something different. So we are looking at 99%, 99.5% accuracy for what we're doing. We want to understand driver behavior. Tesla, when you have to put a vehicle on the road that works 99.99999% of the time, you have to now start doing clever pre-processing to make sure that a white truck is seen, to make sure that all of these specialized things. But a deep net is supposed to just work pixel end to end.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, were there any particular challenges you had about doing this with the Tesla? For instance, I saw you had CAN notifications. I think Tesla doesn't put a lot of stuff out on the normal CAN bus, so
Right.
maybe you're using the internal one. And also, what's the coolest thing you've seen in all those videos that you've been reviewing?
So I actually don't know. I'm officially not allowed to talk about the coolest things. I actually can't even smile about this. Okay, so let's see. But I will say, am I allowed to say this? Okay. But I will say that what I am allowed to say is that people sing a lot more than we realize. So I forgot the other. Oh, CAM messages. Also, really shouldn't talk on stage about that, but I've heard it's possible to reverse engineer some of those through a diagnostic port, but we would never do such a thing.
Do you see at what point the human interaction or driver response becoming input for the data for the Autopilot software? Like if it detects that you're drowsy, that the car will take over for you as opposed to you taking over for it?
100%. I don't know if I have to tweet Elon or I think there is not a single car on the road today that has a driver-facing camera, or at least of the popular automakers, and that seems to be a huge missing piece. Like especially with automation, the car should know what you're doing, and right now, Tesla doesn't know what you're doing except the pressure sensors on the steering wheel, and that's it. Like it needs to know, if it wants to have a better connection with you and be able to communicate more effectively with you, it needs to know what you're doing.
I need a selfie stick on the front.
Right.
Could you comment a little bit about large animal detection, which at least some speakers I've heard think is one of the major problems? And then the other thing, if you're allowed to comment, is how much of a setback is it going to be since Tesla seems to be changing its hardware vendor?
So the first one, detecting what is it?
Large animal detection.
Large animal detection. That is a challenge. So okay, interesting. So in my world, I've spent a little too much time detecting things like bird species, and we've gotten to a point where we can get to close to 100% accuracy on thousands of bird species. So detecting large animals on the road. The only reason that's a challenge is because you're being lazy and not enumerating all the possible things that can happen. So like a grandma with a broom walking across for whatever reason, those are the cases that people present. It should not be a problem. But yes, there's like so many things that happen in this world that are just crazy that you have to expect and you have to train the system to do. And so what was the second question?
The switch in hardware manufacturers. Mobileye.
Sorry, what? He doesn't know. Oh, the Mobileye? Yeah.
Tesla seems to have, separated from Mobileye.
Oh, the Mobileye? Yeah. Well, so I know Mobileye very closely, the founders. It's an interesting decision, and off a line. But it's a huge challenge, and it's actually interesting that they partner with Mobileye in my eyes. I thought they should have been doing it on their own from the very beginning.
Thank you.
Hey, great talk, thank you. A couple of questions. One, has NHTSA expressed any interest in the research that you're doing? And then secondly, are you using the non-autopilot driving as a control against the autopilot driving? And also, are you using cars that don't have autopilot as a control for a baseline for human reaction and human emotion?
Yeah, so first, NHTSA, probably can't, I'm sorry, I sound like a politician, but I can't directly answer that, but they are listening, so we are meeting with them nonstop. So this is our goal is to give NHTSA numbers and to say, this is how you should make policy, this is why autopilot is a safe technology, like real numbers, not just anecdotal evidence. Sorry, but memory, what was the second? Oh, non-autopilot. We have subject 1 that drove here from Boston is our control. So he doesn't have autopilot. It's one of the original vehicles. And we're certainly looking at so we actually have a Mercedes. We have a lot of cars in the fleet that are not Teslas that serve as the baseline, as the control.
You're talking a lot about getting from level 3 to level 4. Where do you go beyond that? So beyond where you get it mostly safety related and level 3 and level 4, where are you looking at anything? Where do you get to level 5?
So that's sort of a personal belief. Where are we? How far? Everyone has an opinion on how far away we are with level 5, and the human in the loop question is about level 3. I think that's where the fascinating world is. I think that's where Tesla is going to succeed the most. Once level 5 is successfully working, then there's no need to understand the human. It's supposed to just work.
Right, because there probably won't even be a human there.
Yeah, so when you do a summon across the country,
right,
and the car is driving on its own, those, I personally believe that we're farther away, and maybe I'm a little less optimistic than even Elon on this point, but I think we're here to stay with level 2 and level 3, and autopilot is paving the way, and we just want to show that it's a safe way.
Cool, thank you.
Last question, maybe?
I was wondering who's funding your research?
So a lot of different sources of funding. So this is a pretty new program, but there is AVT as a consortium of several companies that are joining in. Hopefully Tesla will join in as well. Not sure if I can reveal those companies at this time, but they're automakers. Yeah.
I just always want to know where the spin is coming from or the funds are coming from.
So
That's
I
always-
should say that we're in the talks with Tesla, and they're very, as people here know, very constrained on funding in a good way. Like it's a very slim operation. It's very focused, but they certainly are talking to us and collaborating.
Thank you.
Clarification on that. Was the question maybe about whether there's any bias? If this is being funded by
Oh.
automakers, is there any danger?
There is, yes. Oh, absolutely zero bias. I'm free to say anything. So as you mentioned, a postdoc, like, I'm nervous just because it's filmed, but if you ask me privately, we could say anything we want, and we can publish anything. So this is a very objective, this is why NHTSA is listening to us. We're objective observers.
Let's thank Lex. Thank you.